An arrogant woman walked into Judge Judy's courtroom with a smirk, convinced she could lie, charm, and mock her way through the hearing. But the moment she laughed at the wrong time, Judge Judy's eyes shifted, sharp and dangerous. Seconds later, her confidence cracked as one tiny detail on a document exposed the trap she accidentally built for herself. And what Judge Judy uncovered next will absolutely shock you. But before we dive in, tell me, where are you watching from? Don't forget the subscribe button. The courtroom stilled around it like a camera freeze frame. Even the fluorescent lights seemed to flicker in protest as the sound rolled across the benches. Judge Judy did not look up immediately. She simply placed her pen down with slow, deliberate precision, the way a storm gathers before it decides where to strike. Across from her stood the defendant, a woman in her early 30s with immaculate hair, glossy lips, and a confidence so loud it practically strutted. She adjusted her blazer with a flourish, like she were preparing for a photo shoot instead of a hearing. Her smirk lingered as she looked around the room, daring anyone to challenge the superiority she wore like perfume. The plaintiff stood beside her, a softer presence entirely. A young woman, shoulders tucked inward, clutching a folder so tightly the pages inside bent at the corners. Her posture spoke before she did: exhaustion, hurt, and a quiet determination. She glanced at the defendant, then quickly looked away, as if even eye contact risked another blow. The bailiff shifted his stance. The audience leaned forward. Something unseen had just been set in motion. Judge Judy finally lifted her gaze. Her expression did not change, but the temperature in the room did. It dropped, not dramatically, not theatrically, just enough for everyone to feel it. Her eyes lingered on the defendant for a second longer than usual. That second felt like a warning. "Is there something amusing?" Judge Judy asked, her tone calm enough to make the question sting. The defendant shrugged, a gesture soaked in dismissal. "Just did not expect this to take so long," she said brightly, dripping casual disrespect as if she could not help herself. She waved a hand toward the plaintiff. "Some people make everything dramatic." The plaintiff flinched. Judge Judy noticed. The judge leaned back slowly, studying the defendant the way a surgeon studies an incision point. "We will see," she murmured, tapping the edge of the bench with her nail, a soft, rhythmic sound that carried authority. The defendant rolled her eyes as if bored already. She flipped her hair over her shoulder, an exaggerated motion meant to reclaim attention. "Can we just get this over with? I have a real job to get back to." The courtroom murmured at her tone, arrogance wrapped in entitlement, confidence with no humility attached. Judge Judy's gaze sharpened, but she remained silent, letting the woman dig her own footing deeper. The plaintiff inhaled shakily. Her hands tightened around the folder. She had not spoken yet, but the fear lived on her face, the fear of not being believed, of being overshadowed by someone louder and crueler. Judge Judy noticed that too. And then, while the defendant basked in her own performance, Judge Judy's eyes drifted downward to something on the table in front of the plaintiff. A corner of a document, a slip of handwriting, a detail the defendant had not seen. Something that did not match. Something that made Judge Judy's expression shift, just slightly. Her pen lifted again, hovering above the page, not to write, but because she had spotted something the arrogant woman had missed entirely. Her confidence swelled the moment she opened her mouth. Not truth. Not clarity. Performance polished and poisonous. The defendant leaned forward, placing her hands on the podium as if she were stepping onto a stage rather than entering a courtroom. The smirk she wore earlier had softened into something even more controlled, a graceful smile that pretended charm while hiding the edge of a blade. Her voice slid into the air smooth and rehearsed. "Well, Your Honor," she began, "I am just trying to protect myself from exaggerated accusations." She gestured delicately toward the plaintiff, the way one might gesture toward a mess someone else made. "She tends to get emotional." The plaintiff's eyes fell to the floor, pain flickering across her expression like a shadow. Judge Judy observed the defendant with cool stillness. No blink, no nod, just a surgical silence. The defendant took that as encouragement. She launched into her narrative, one that flowed too neatly. Every sentence dripped with self-praise, every detail positioned her as the responsible one, the composed one, the victim who rose above unfair criticism. Her hands danced theatrically as she spoke, punctuating lines she clearly believed were impressive. "You see, I tried to help her. Honestly, I did." Her head tilted sympathetically. "But she can be sensitive, overreactive." Another slow, pitying glance toward the plaintiff. "And when things did not go her way, she started blaming me." Judge Judy's expression did not change, but the plaintiff's shoulders curled slightly inward, absorbing every passive-aggressive blow like old, familiar bruises. The defendant continued, her rhythm too steady, too practiced. Every sentence slid perfectly into the next, the kind of story people do not tell unless they have rehearsed it in a mirror. Meanwhile, Judge Judy shifted her pen between her fingers, not writing, just waiting. The more the defendant talked, the more she seemed to enjoy hearing herself. Her posture grew taller. Her smile widened. She even gave a small laugh as she recounted the plaintiff, misunderstanding simple work responsibilities. It was a laugh designed to belittle. The plaintiff finally lifted her gaze. Her voice quivered. "That is not what—" The defendant cut her off with a dismissive wave. "Oh, come on. Do not act like I am the problem. You know how dramatic you can be." Judge Judy's eyes snapped to the defendant with sharp focus, a scalpel-like shift in energy. The defendant did not notice. She was too busy orchestrating her own performance. But something else was shifting too, the room. As the defendant continued, small inconsistencies began to appear. A date changed, a detail softened, a sequence flipped. The plaintiff glanced nervously at the folder in her hands, the one holding the truth she feared would not be seen. Judge Judy saw the glance, and the hesitation, and the fear. Then she noticed something else, an inconsistency between the defendant's timeline and a detail she had mentioned casually seconds earlier. Judge Judy leaned slightly forward, voice calm and cutting. "Tell me," she said, "which version of your story do you want to stick with?" The defendant froze, her smile faltering. Before the woman could recover, Judge Judy asked one quiet question, a question so precise, so surgical, that it stopped the performance mid-breath. Silence landed like a weight. The defendant opened her mouth. But the answer she needed was not there. Her lips parted, confidence trying to flow through them the way it had minutes earlier, clean, smooth, unbothered. But now the air around her felt different. Judge Judy's quiet question still hung in the space between them like a fine thread waiting to snap. The defendant blinked. Once, twice, searching her own story for the version that would save her. What I meant was," she stammered, her voice thinning. The shift was small but undeniable, the first crack in her carefully constructed mask. Her eyes darted downward, scanning nothing in particular, as though hoping the right lie would materialize on the desk in front of her. Judge Judy did not interrupt. She let the silence tighten. The plaintiff watched cautiously, hands clasped around the folder in a protective grip. Her breath hitched, not from victory, but from fear that the moment might pass without meaning anything. She had been dismissed before. She knew how easy it was for truth to be overlooked when someone louder insisted otherwise. When the defendant finally found a version of her story to cling to, she straightened her back and offered it like a soft excuse wrapped in certainty. "What I meant earlier," she said carefully, choosing each word like stepping stones, "was that the issue happened after the meeting, not before. I might have mixed up the timing." "Mixed up?" Judge Judy's pen tapped once, a quiet punctuation that suggested she disagreed. "So," the judge replied, tone cool, You want to correct your previous statement. The defendant hesitated another crack, then nodded stiffly. Yes, that is what I meant. But the plaintiff's voice, fragile but brave, entered the space. That is not true, you told me. I did not tell you anything. The defendant snapped automatically, too quickly, too harshly. The veneer peeled back further. You always take things the wrong way. Her words came out sharp, defensive, trembling with something she would never admit. Fear that control was slipping. Judge Judy raised a hand. Enough. The single word sliced cleanly through the tension. The courtroom settled into an uneasy stillness as the judge turned toward the plaintiff. You brought documentation. The plaintiff nodded and lifted the folder slightly, its edge catching the light as if signaling its importance. The defendant's eyes flashed toward it with the panic of someone seeing a door closing. Judge Judy noticed the look immediately. The defendant's gaze was too quick, too fearful, the instinctive flinch of someone who knows what lies inside. Bring it here, Judge Judy said. The plaintiff stepped forward, placing the folder gently on the desk. Judge Judy slid it open with slow deliberation. Pages rustled softly, but in the quiet courtroom, the sound was as loud as thunder. The deaf and Dance swallowed hard, her composure unraveling by degrees. Her foot tapped beneath the podium. Her fingers fidgeted with the sleeve of her blazer. She kept glancing at the folder, at one particular page half visible even from where she stood. Judge Judy's eyes stopped on a handwritten note. Her brow shifted, almost imperceptibly. The defendant froze. Judge Judy lifted that page, turning it just enough for the courtroom light to catch something, a detail the defendant desperately hoped she would not notice. The folder hit the desk with a weight no paper should have. Not loud but heavy. Heavy in the way truth is heavy before it breaks. Judge Judy slid the top page out just enough for the ink to breathe. The courtroom leaned toward the movement as if pulled by gravity itself. Even the cameras, resting in their silent mechanical patience, seemed to adjust their angle as the truth inched into view. The defendant's smile thinned. Her posture stiffened. Her fingers tightened around the podium until her knuckles paled. The plaintiff watched with wide, guarded eyes. She had lived with the truth quietly for too long. Seeing it in Judge Judy's hands made her tremble, not from fear, but from the possibility of finally being believed. Judge Judy's gaze moved across the handwritten note. It was a simple page, a short agreement, a few lines of obligations and a signature. But sometimes truth is not loud. Sometimes it hides in quiet ink. Ms. Fowler, Judge Judy said, addressing the defendant with measured calm, is this your signature? The defendant blinked fast, almost imperceptibly. I do not think so, she said with a shrug she hoped sounded casual. It looks messy. I always sign neatly. Judge Judy lifted the page, angling it slightly. Messy or not, does it look like yours? The defendant leaned forward only a fraction. No, definitely not. I never signed anything like that. A ripple of murmurs moved through the audience. Judge Judy set the document down and reached for another sheet inside the folder, a form the defendant had filled out for HR months earlier. Similar handwriting, similar slant, similar pressure. The letters curved in the same distinctive way. This is your workplace form, correct? Judge Judy asked. The defendant hesitated. Her eyes flicked to the plaintiff, a mistake, then returned to the judge. Yes, she said quickly. That one is mine. Judge Judy placed both documents side by side. Interesting. The air tightened. Side by side, the similarities were impossible to ignore. Same loops, same tilt, same hurried flourish at the end of her last name. Denial was no longer a strategy, it was a confession in disguise. The defendant's smile faltered. Well, maybe someone copied it. Judge Judy's eyebrows lifted. Someone copied your signature onto a document that benefits you. The defendant's throat bobbed. She opened her mouth. No words arrived. The plaintiff exhaled shakily, a breath she had been holding for months. Judge Judy tapped her pen against the forged page once, twice, each tap sharpening the atmosphere. Ms. Fowler, your timeline is already inconsistent. Your earlier statements conflict with each other. And now this signature that you insist is not yours, even though it matches your own handwriting. The defendant's eyes darted again to the plaintiff's folder, to the remaining documents still untouched. Panic flickered behind her pupils, faint but unmistakable, the fear of someone who senses the floor shifting beneath her feet. Judge Judy's voice lowered, steady and surgical. Are you absolutely sure this is not your signature? A long silence followed. Too long. Every eye in the room locked on her. Every breath held. At last the defendant swallowed and whispered, "Positive." Judge Judy's gaze sharpened, because the handwriting proved she had just lied to the court. Her smile returned, but it had lost its shine. Too stiff. Too stretched. A smile worn like armor on someone who finally hears the crack running through it. Judge Judy did not move right away. She let the defendant's lie sit in the air, untouched and unmistakable, like a stain that could not be scrubbed out with charm or confidence. The courtroom shifted into quiet discomfort, every person sensing the unraveling happening in real time. The defendant lifted her chin, trying to recreate the poise she entered with. But her posture was off now, shoulders too tight, fingers tapping a frantic rhythm against the podium. Her eyes kept darting toward the plaintiff's folder, as though truth itself were lurking inside, waiting to leap out. Ms. Fowler, Judge Judy said evenly, you understand the seriousness of denying a signature that clearly resembles your own. The defendant laughed, not the bold laugh from earlier, but something thin, anxious, brittle. I mean, stress does funny things, right? Maybe I forgot. Maybe I signed something similar. It has been a long week. Judge Judy's stare did not be. Link, this document is from 2 months ago. That tiny smile cracked again. The plaintiff watched quietly, clutching her hands together. For the first time, she seemed a little less afraid. Not powerful, not yet, but no longer buried under the defendant's shadow. Trying to regain control, the defendant straightened. Look, I am telling the truth. I do not forge signatures. I do not need to. This whole issue is blown out of proportion. Judge Judy took the HR form, the one with the defendant's unquestioned signature, and placed it directly beside the disputed one. She angled them perfectly parallel, letting the similarity speak louder than any cross-examination. The defendant's breath hitched. Judge Judy's voice dropped slightly. These two signatures were written by the same person. The loops, the slope, the pressure, the distinctive flick at the end of the last name, identical. The defendant's smile faltered into a twitch. Well, maybe, it just looks similar. Coincidentally, Judge Judy asked, tone dry as desert air. The defendant swallowed, but no answer followed. The plaintiff looked down, her eyes softening as if witnessing something she never thought she would see. The woman who had tormented her finally losing confidence. Judge Judy reached into the folder again. There is another document referenced earlier, she said. We will review it shortly. Panic fluttered across the defendant's face like a trapped bird. She rushed forward verbally, eager to redirect the narrative. She is twisting everything, Your Honor. She exaggerates. She always has. People at work know she can be. Ms. Fowler, Judge Judy cut in sharply, do not deflect. The defendant froze at the tone. Judge Judy nodded to the plaintiff. You mentioned another envelope. The plaintiff nodded, carefully reaching into her bag. Yes, Your Honor, it contains the messages she sent me, and some she sent other people. The defendant's face drained. Judge Judy motioned to the bailiff. Please bring it forward. The plaintiff handed over a sealed envelope, thick, heavy, carrying weight far beyond paper. The bailiff placed it on the desk. The sound of it hitting the wood was small, but the defendant flinched as though something inside might bite. Judge Judy rested her fingertips on the envelope. Without breaking eye contact, she said, "Let us see what your own words reveal, Miss Fowler." The envelope looked ordinary, but the defendant stared at it as if it were ticking. Confidence does not fade all at once. It erodes inch by inch. Judge Judy lifted the envelope with a slow, deliberate motion. The room seemed to hold its breath as she opened it, peeling back the seal with the same calm precision she used for unraveling lies. Inside lay a stack of printed text messages, edges slightly curled, ink bold and unmistakable. The defendant blinked rapidly, her throat bobbing in a hard swallow. She clasped her hands together, forcing a smile that did not reach her eyes. "Texts can be misinterpreted," she said, voice trembling beneath artificial sweetness. Judge Judy did not respond. She simply slid the first page out and placed it flat on the desk. The message at the top was short. Cruel. Clear. The defendant read it from where she stood, and her breath stuttered. The plaintiff shifted beside her, fingers twisting together, dread and hope battling inside her like opposing currents. These were the words she had saved not out of vengeance, but survival. Words she feared would never matter to anyone but her. Judge Judy's eyes scanned the page. "Did you write these?" she asked, tone steady, not accusing, simply inviting truth to walk into the light. The defendant hesitated. "Well, I mean, some of those messages were jokes, sarcasm. You know how friends tease each other." "Is that how you describe your relationship with the plaintiff?" Judge Judy asked. The defendant's lips parted, but the answer tangled in her throat. Judge Judy turned the page. This one was worse. A message dripping with condescension, one that openly mocked the plaintiff's approachability, another line bragging about getting her to crumble soon. The kind of message that does not merely reflect arrogance, it reflects intention. A quiet gasp rippled through the audience. The defendant took a tiny step back. "That text," Judge Judy said, tapping the page once with her fingertip, "was sent at 9:12 a.m. according to your earlier testimony. You claimed you had no communication with the plaintiff that morning." The defendant's smile collapsed entirely. I forgot. It was hectic. I must have been texting someone else." The plaintiff's voice, shaky but growing steadier, rose into the space. "You sent that to me, right before you confronted me in the office." The defendant snapped her head toward her. "You misunderstood. You always misunderstand." Judge Judy's palm lifted, a silent command for quiet. Her attention returned to the pages. She moved them carefully as though each one carried a separate truth waiting its turn. The more she read, the more the defendant's posture caved inward, her shoulders folding like her self-assurance was draining out through her spine. "Ms. Fowler," Judge Judy said, "these messages do not read like sarcasm. They read like deliberate manipulation. They read like someone preparing to humiliate a coworker." The defendant's breath fluttered. "It was just venting. People vent." Judge Judy's gaze sharpened. "People vent, they do not threaten." The plaintiff's eyes shimmered, hearing her experience finally named for what it was. Judge Judy reached the final page, a single message at the bottom, sent late at night, full of malice and pride. The judge set it down between them. "Read the last message aloud," she told the plaintiff. The defendant froze. The plaintiff picked up the page with trembling hands, and the defendant's entire face collapsed into fear of what was about to be heard. The plaintiff's hands trembled as she lifted the page. Her voice wavered before the first word even left her mouth. Across from her, the defendant stared like she was watching her own mask slip from her fingers. For a moment, time did not move. It held. The plaintiff inhaled, steadying herself not for drama but for survival. She had carried these messages alone for months, hidden like bruises no one could see. Now, with Judge Judy watching her gently, she found the courage to speak. Her voice cracked on the first word. She wrote, a shaky breath. Tomorrow, I'm going to make her fall apart in front of everyone. The line landed in the room like a dropped glass, sharp, shattering, impossible to ignore. A collective gasp rippled through the audience. Even the bailiff's expression shifted, jaw tightening with quiet disapproval. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, their cold glow reflecting the stark cruelty etched on the printed page. The defendant stumbled forward in a frantic whisper. I did not mean it like that. Judge Judy lifted a hand, stopping her mid-sentence with nothing but silence. The plaintiff continued reading. She is too soft, too kind. It will be fun watching her break. Fun. A word that changed everything. The plaintiff lowered the page slowly, like setting down a weight that had lived in her chest far too long. Her eyes glistened not out of vengeance but exhaustion, months of humiliation, months of second-guessing every interaction, months of doubting herself. Judge Judy leaned back, the lines around her eyes tightening with a different kind of disappointment, colder, deeper. Her voice came out low, steady, and edged with moral gravity. Ms. Fowler, she said, this message is not sarcasm. This is intent. The defendant's voice rose in panic. It was a joke, a stupid joke. She takes everything personally. I was just planning to make her cry, Judge Judy asked sharply, planning to embarrass her in front of coworkers. No, the defendant insisted, but her voice broke on the lie. The plaintiff finally looked at her, really looked at her, not with anger, but with a sadness that softened the entire room. Why? She whispered. What did I ever do to you? That single question shattered the last of the defendant's composure. Her eyes darted around as though searching for an exit, an excuse, a version of reality she could still control. But there was none. Judge Judy's tone shifted, quieter now, almost surgical. This message shows premeditation, not misunderstanding, not stress, not miscommunication. The defendant swallowed hard, hands trembling on the podium. Do you understand what this tells me? Judge Judy asked, voice soft but cutting. The defendant finally whispered, that I went too far. No, Judge Judy replied. It tells me you went exactly where you intended to go. The plaintiff's breath hitched. The defendant's shoulders slumped. The room fell into a hush so deep it felt like gravity had increased. Judge Judy leaned forward just slightly, enough to reclaim complete control of the moment. Ms. Fowler, she said, do you want to keep talking or do you want to start telling the truth? The defendant froze, caught between pride and collapse. Her lips parted, searching for a lie, but for the first time in the entire hearing, no words came out. She opened her mouth, but nothing emerged. A silence thicker than guilt pressed against her throat, exposing her more deeply than any accusation could. Judge Judy watched that silence with the patience of someone who had seen pride break 1,000 different ways. She waited, letting the defendant's breath falter, letting the stillness become its own kind of truth. The defendant's fingers clutched the edges of the podium as if holding on to the last sliver of her authority. Ms. Fowler, Judge Judy said finally, voice calm but edged with steel, your messages contradict almost every statement you have made today. The defendant inhaled sharply, as though scrambling. For something, anything that sounded like control. I already told you it was. A joke, Judge Judy finished for her. Yes, a joke that you followed with actions that matched the intention word for word. That landed hard. The plaintiff's eyes drifted down, absorbing the moment with a quiet relief she did not dare show fully. The audience leaned forward in collective anticipation, sensing the shift happening before them, the slow, steady turning of the tide. The defendant forced a weak laugh. Everyone jokes about coworkers. That does not mean anything actually happened. Judge Judy's eyes narrowed. Nothing happened. Well, not like she claims. A beat of silence. Then, good, Judge Judy said, because I cross-checked the timestamps of your messages with the building's security logs. The defendant blinked. What? Judge Judy continued, her tone precise. At 9:12 a.m., when you sent the message about making her fall apart, you also swiped into the west corridor, the same hallway where the plaintiff was stationed. And at 9:15 a.m., there is a record of you entering her office. A murmur rolled across the courtroom. The defendant's face tightened. I go down that hall all the time. That does not mean. The judge cut in gently. At 9:16, the plaintiff filed a help request with HR about an altercation. The timestamps aligned too perfectly to be coincidence. The defendant's hands shook now, small tremors she tried to hide behind the podium. Her voice, once dripping with confidence, now wavered like something unstable, the edges fraying. You are twisting everything, she snapped, desperation bleeding through the cracks. This is unfair. What is unfair, Judge Judy replied, leaning forward slightly, is intentionally tormenting someone and then lying about it under oath. Tears gathered in the plaintiff's eyes, silent but undeniable. The defendant looked away, jaw clenched, breath quickening, as if a dam inside her were splintering. Judge Judy reached for a remote resting beside her notes. The defendant's eyes widened. She had not noticed the remote until now, or the small monitor mounted on the side wall. Ms. Fowler, Judge Judy said, her voice settling into a cool, final calm, I obtained the building's security footage this morning. The defendant's breath stopped. A single heartbeat passed. Judge Judy pressed a button. The monitor flickered to life, grainy hallway footage beginning to play. The defendant went pale. Every ounce of confidence drained from her face as the screen showed a figure unmistakably her, stepping into the plaintiff's office with a smirk. A smirk identical to the one she wore when she first walked into the courtroom. Judge Judy folded her hands and said softly, "Let us watch the moment you said never happened." The screen lit the room in cold, unforgiving blue. Every eye locked on it. Every lie the defendant told finally had something louder to answer to. The hallway footage played without drama, no music, no angles, no editing, just the sterile truth of a camera that had no reason to lie. The timestamp blinked in the corner. 9:12 a.m. The defendant stepped into frame, walking with the sharp, purposeful stride of someone who believed the world was hers to rearrange. Her smirk, the same one she wore when she dared to laugh at Judge Judy, was unmistakable. The plaintiff's breath caught quietly beside her. Judge Judy noticed. The defendant stared at the monitor as though watching a stranger, but she knew, everyone knew, the woman in that footage was her. The video showed the plaintiff at her desk, sorting papers with the soft attentiveness she had described earlier. The defendant walked in, leaning against the doorframe with folded arms, hovering too close, smiling too wide. The camera had no sound, but disrespect does not need audio to be understood. The plaintiff's body tightened in the footage, a small recoil, visible even through grainy pixels. The defendant in the video tilted her head, said something smug, before lifting the plaintiff's folder off the table without permission. She flipped through the papers with casual arrogance, then tossed them back down, shrugging as if annoyed. The plaintiff, watching the footage now, pressed her lips together to keep them from trembling. The real defendant swallowed. "She is overreacting," she murmured weakly. "It was not." "Ms. Fowler," Judge Judy said sharply, "the camera is not overreacting." A ripple moved through the courtroom, not noise, but a collective shift in emotion. The defendant's power had evaporated. What remained was a woman watching the evidence she thought would never surface. In the footage, the defendant leaned closer to the plaintiff, pointing at her sternly before walking away with a triumphant swing of her shoulder. Judge Judy paused the video. The frozen frame showed the defendant mid-smirk. "Is this the moment," Judge Judy asked quietly, "that you testified never occurred?" I do not remember." "You remembered enough to deny it." The plaintiff exhaled shakily, covering her mouth as tears began to gather. Her shoulders shook with the weight of being believed, a weight heavy enough to collapse a person who has spent too long carrying injustice alone. Judge Judy turned toward her gently. "Take your time." Then she faced the defendant again, tone lowering into something colder. "This footage proves intentional intimidation, and your messages show premeditation." The defendant's voice trembled. It looks worse than it was." Judge Judy leaned forward. "No, it looks exactly how it was." Silence filled the room. Silence thick with consequence. The defendant's breath became uneven. She blinked fast, fighting the tears threatening to expose the fear she had been hiding beneath her arrogance. Judge Judy glanced down at her notes, then upward, as if remembering something else. A faint whisper from the defendant drifted across the bench, barely audible but sharp enough to cut. "This is ridiculous." Judge Judy sat up straighter. "I heard that." The defendant froze, eyes widening just enough to betray panic. Judge Judy's voice lowered to a knife-edge softness. "Would you like to repeat what you just whispered, or should I?" Judge Judy leaned forward, eyes narrowing just enough to shift the air. The defendant's whisper, that single careless breath of arrogance, had not slipped past her. And now the room waited for what would happen when contempt met consequence. The defendant stiffened, caught between pride and fear. Her lips parted, trying to form a defense, but Judge Judy's gaze held her like a pin through glass. She had lost control of the story the moment the footage appeared. The whisper was the final thread snapping. "You said," Judge Judy repeated calmly, "this is ridiculous." The words emerged not as accusation, but as a mirror, reflecting the defendant's own disrespect back at her. The defendant swallowed hard. I did not mean it like that. This whole thing is blown out of proportion." Judge Judy's eyebrow lifted with surgical precision. "Ridiculous is what you call evidence or accountability." The defendant's breath faltered. She looked down, smoothing the edge of her blazer, trying to rebuild a facade that was already collapsing. "But the plaintiff." She watched the exchange with cautious hope. Her hands clasped in her lap, still trembling, but less from fear and more from release. She had endured so much in silence that hearing Judge Judy defend her felt like warmth she did not expect. Judge Judy shifted her attention to the plaintiff. "You said earlier there were verbal encounters not captured on camera. Now, with this footage, I want to give you space to explain in your own words." The plaintiff nodded slowly. Her voice remained soft but steadier now. She would come into my office every morning, stand too close, make comments about my work and about me. She looked toward the defendant, who flinched. I tried to keep peace. I asked her nicely to stop, but she always made it feel like I was the problem. The defendant snapped, grasping at anything. "That is not true. You always twist everything." "Ms. Fowler," Judge Judy said sharply, "I did not ask you to speak." The defendant froze, tension radiating from her shoulders. Judge Judy turned back to the plaintiff. "Continue." "She told other people things about me, lies. She laughed when I walked into meetings. And the morning on the video, she told me I was too weak and that she'd prove it." The room tightened in collective outrage. The defendant looked away, blinking fast, but her jaw clenched, still chasing the last scrap of control. Judge Judy let the testimony settle before returning her gaze to the defendant. "You claimed earlier that the plaintiff misinterpreted your behavior, that she was dramatic, oversensitive." Her voice hardened. "But the footage, the messages, and now her statement all share the same pattern: intimidation. Intentional, repeated, targeted intimidation." The defendant's eyes glistened, anger, fear, or both, her voice thin as paper. I did not know she felt like that. Because you did not care to know, Judge Judy replied. Then she reached into a stack beside the folder and pulled out a printed transcript, 4 pages clipped neatly. She slid it forward just enough for the defendant to see the first line. Recognition washed over the defendant's face like a slow-motion collapse. It was the conversation. The conversation. The one she thought no one else had heard. The color drained from her cheeks. Judge Judy tapped the top page lightly. This, she said, is the transcript of a statement you made to a coworker 2 weeks before this incident, and it is time we read it. The paper trembled before she even touched it. Not the judge's hand, the defendant's breath. Guilt has a way of recognizing itself before anyone else names it. Judge Judy slid the transcript closer, her fingertips releasing it with the same care given to dangerous evidence. The defendant stared at the clipped pages as if the words might leap off and attack her. Her eyes flicked between the paper and the judge, silently begging for a reality where this document did not exist. There wasn't one. This, Judge Judy began, was provided by a coworker who overheard your conversation in the break room, 2 weeks before the incident. The plaintiff's hands tightened in her lap. She knew something was coming, something she had felt but never been able to prove. Judge Judy flipped the first page. Her voice remained calm, but the words cut. I'm tired of playing nice with her. Judge Judy paused, letting the line hang like smoke. She thinks everyone likes her because she's sweet. It's pathetic. The plaintiff's breath quivered. The defendant's knees wobbled. Judge Judy looked up. Did you say this? The defendant didn't answer. Her jaw clenched. Her throat worked in a dry swallow. Judy continued. I'll show her what real influence looks like. A ripple of shock waved across the audience. The defendant's face crumpled at the edges, still fighting, still denying, but losing ground with every word. Judge Judy turned the page. I'm done being overshadowed by someone who smiles her way through the day. The plaintiff blinked hard, tears collecting at the corners of her eyes, not from pain this time, but from the deepest kind of recognition. She had never understood why she was targeted. She had asked herself for months, what did I do wrong? Judge Judy's voice softened just barely. It seems you resented her not for something she did, but for something she was. The defendant snapped out a whisper, trembling. That's not, I didn't mean, that conversation was private. Truth doesn't stop being truth when spoken quietly, Judge Judy replied. The judge scanned the final line on the page, then read it clearly. She acts like being kind is enough. Silence tore through the courtroom. The plaintiff closed her eyes as a single tear slid down her cheek. Not humiliation, relief. The defendant looked at her and something inside her cracked. Her face softened, defenses dissolving into something raw and unguarded. For the first time, there was no arrogance, no smirk, no mask. Only fear. Only the truth rising behind it. Judge Judy leaned forward. Ms. Fowler, everything up to this point has shown us what you did, but this, she tapped the transcript gently, this tells us why. The defendant wiped at her eyes helplessly, realizing there was nowhere left to hide. Her voice wavered like a candle flame about to collapse. Your Honor, she whispered, I didn't hate her. Judge Judy waited. The courtroom waited. The plaintiff waited. The defendant choked on the next words, her voice breaking open. I couldn't stand that everyone liked her more than me. Her confession fell into the room like a stone dropped into still water, sending ripples of realization through every face watching. Judge Judy exhaled slowly, not triumphant, not angry, simply understanding the depth of what had been revealed. Judy folded her hands and asked, in a voice quiet enough to disarm anyone, Then tell me, Ms. Fowler, why did her kindness feel like a threat to you? Her answer didn't burst out, it leaked. Slow, trembling, unraveling her piece by piece. The room watched a woman shed the armor she thought was her identity. The defendant stood frozen, fingers pressed so tightly into the podium her knuckles blanched. Judge Judy's question, why did her kindness feel like a threat, hung in the air like a mirror she didn't want to look into. Everyone saw it. The pride, the panic, the shame twisting through her expression like a frayed rope. Her voice finally emerged, thin as a whisper. Because. Her eyes flicked toward the plaintiff, then away quickly, as though the truth burned. She made everything look easy. The plaintiff blinked. She hadn't expected that, not that reason, not that vulnerability. The defendant swallowed hard. People liked her, they trusted her. She walked into a room and everyone relaxed. When she talked, people listened. Her words trembled, no longer defensive, confessional. I worked twice as hard and nobody cared. Judge Judy remained silent, letting the truth unfurl. The defendant's voice cracked. I know it sounds stupid, I know, but every time she smiled I felt small, like I was the one everyone was comparing her to. Tears gathered in her eyes, clinging to the last bit of pride she had left, and I hated how that made me feel. The plaintiff's eyes softened, not out of forgiveness, but out of the shock of finally understanding the darkness behind months of cruelty. The defendant wiped her cheeks roughly. So I convinced myself she wasn't real, that she was fake, that people only liked her because she pretended to be nice. She shook her head, a broken laugh escaping. But she wasn't ending, I was. Judge Judy leaned back, hands folded, listening without judgment but without sympathy either. Her voice, when it came, was softer than before, not gentle but reflective. Insecurity, she said, is not an excuse for cruelty. The defendant nodded miserably. It explains something, Judge Judy continued, but it doesn't erase anything. The plaintiff shifted, eyes glistening, and whispered almost involuntarily, I never wanted to make you feel small. The defendant choked on a sob, looking at her for the first time without hostility. I know, she brushed at tears that kept coming faster. That was the problem. You never did anything wrong. You were just you. The courtroom sat in weighted silence, not the angry kind, not the dramatic kind, but the kind that comes when truth lays people bare. Judge Judy allowed the moment to breathe before speaking. Ms. Fowler, remorse does matter, but remorse is not measured by tears. It's measured by accountability. The defendant nodded again, trembling. I'm sorry, she whispered, not performative this time, but cracked open and raw. I never meant for it to get this far. The plaintiff inhaled shakily, clutching her hands together, not ready to respond but no longer shrinking in fear. Judge Judy's gaze swept across both women, one broken open, one healing, both changed. Her voice returned to its decisive calm. Intent has been established, harm has been established, now we address consequence. The defendant flinched. Judge Judy lowered her eyes to the forged contract resting on the desk, the original catalyst of everything, and said, Let's revisit the document that started all of this, shall we? Judge Judy did not raise her voice. She didn't have to. The quiet way she picked up that forged document was enough to make the defendant's breath catch. The paper lay between them like a scar, faint but permanent, the first cut that had split this entire conflict open. Judge Judy lifted it gently, as if its weight symbolized something heavier than the ink on its surface. This, she said, tone calm but edged with unmistakable authority, is not just a signature, it represents a choice. The defendant's shoulders hunched as though bracing for impact. She wiped another tear, her confidence long gone, replaced by something smaller, not humility exactly, but the awareness of how far she had fallen. Judge Judy tapped the page lightly. You created a document to give yourself power you were not entitled to, and when confronted, you lied about it, boldly, repeatedly. The defendant closed her eyes. shame washing over her in slow waves. The plaintiff watched quietly, hands clasped together. She did not look vindictive. She didn't even look triumphant. She simply looked relieved. Seen, finally. Judge Judy continued. Your actions weren't mistakes. They were deliberate decisions, layered choices driven by insecurity and arrogance. Choices that hurt someone who did absolutely nothing to deserve it. The defendant's voice wavered. I know, she whispered, barely audible. I know, and I'm sorry, really. Judge Judy didn't rush to answer. She let the apology linger, testing its sincerity by the way the defendant's gaze remained lowered, not defensive this time, but broken. Then the judge turned to the plaintiff with unexpected gentleness. When someone fabricates documentation to manipulate a coworker, it doesn't just disrupt the workplace. It damages trust. It undermines dignity. And you've carried that weight quietly for too long. The plaintiff's eyes shimmered. I didn't want revenge, she said softly. I just needed someone to believe me. Judge Judy gave a single nod. And now someone has. The defendant closed her eyes at that, a small, pained exhale slipping through her lips. Ms. Fowler, Judge Judy said, returning her gaze to the defendant, guilt and remorse are not substitutes for accountability. Her voice firmed. But they are prerequisites. The defendant opened her eyes slowly. I'll do whatever I need to, she whispered. I don't want to be this person. Good, Judge Judy replied, because growth only begins where denial ends. Silence settled again, heavy but different now, less charged, more contemplative. For the court's purposes, Judge Judy continued, restitution is required. You will compensate the plaintiff for damages resulting from your conduct, including emotional distress tied to the documented harassment. The plaintiff inhaled shakily, gratitude mixing with lingering sadness. This verdict, Judge Judy added, is not meant to destroy you. It is meant to redirect you. The defendant nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. Judge Judy set the contract down one final time. You forged authority because you felt powerless. You weaponized insecurity instead of confronting it. And now, you must rebuild from what you chose to break. The defendant's voice cracked. Can I fix this, ever? Judge Judy looked at her. Not sympathetically, but with unflinching honesty. That depends, she said, on whether you change or simply learn to hide better. A line that made the defendant's breath stop. Judge Judy reached for the contract again, then paused, her eyes shifting toward the plaintiff as she said, Before I deliver final judgment, I want to hear your last statement. The contract lay between them like an artifact from a battlefield. Silent, stained not with ink, but with the consequences of pride. Judge Judy lifted the forged document once more, pinching the top corner with 2 fingers as though the paper itself carried a residue she didn't want to touch. The defendant's eyes followed every movement, her breath trembling with the knowledge that this single sheet had dismantled the image she'd spent years constructing. Ms. Fowler, Judge Judy began, the authority in her voice returning with full force, a signature is a promise, a written reflection of honesty. She tapped the page. This one is a reflection of manipulation. The defendant winced, shoulders curling inward. Her earlier bravado, the smirk, the entitlement, the casual dismissal, had evaporated entirely. Now she stood small, exposed, stripped of every layer she once hid behind. The plaintiff watched her, fingers interlaced tightly in her lap. She didn't look empowered in a triumphant way, more in the way a person finally exhales after holding their breath underwater for too long. There was relief in her expression, yes, but also sadness. A sadness born from seeing how unnecessary the cruelty had been. Judge Judy continued, This document was your attempt to rewrite a power dynamic that never belonged to you. Instead of improving your own standing, you tried to diminish hers. She turned toward the plaintiff. That is not just unethical, it is deeply personal harm. The defendant whispered hoarsely, I know, I never should have done it. Judge Judy didn't soften. But you did, repeatedly, and then lied about it repeatedly. Her emphasis was sharp, not angry, exacting. The courtroom sat in quiet tension as Judge Judy folded the contract neatly, aligning each corner with meticulous precision. The defendant flinched with every crease, as though the sound of folding paper was somehow louder than the slam of a gavel. "You see," Judge Judy said, holding the folded contract in her hand, "power doesn't come from pushing others down. Real influence comes from integrity, effort, and character." She turned fully toward the defendant. "You had an opportunity to fix this long before today, to show humility, to show honesty." A pause. "But instead, you doubled down." The defendant's tears spilled again unchecked. "I was jealous," she whispered. "I was scared. I didn't want to be invisible." Judge Judy nodded once, not in agreement, but in acknowledgement. "Then you create your value. You don't steal it." The plaintiff's breath hitched at the truth of it. Judge Judy set the folded contract aside, almost ceremonially. "Before I deliver my verdict, I want one thing from each of you." She pointed to the plaintiff. "You first. What outcome do you believe is fair, not vindictive, fair?" The plaintiff inhaled deeply. Her voice was gentle but resolute. "I don't want to hurt her. I just need the court to say what she did was wrong." The defendant squeezed her eyes shut, as if the words cut deeper than any punishment. Judge Judy turned to the defendant. "And you, anything you want to say before judgment?" The defendant looked up, eyes red, voice shattered. I don't want to be remembered for this." Judge Judy picked up her gavel, her expression unreadable, and said, "That depends entirely on what you choose to do after I make my ruling. Before we hear the verdict, ask yourself, do people truly change, or do they simply learn to hide their flaws more carefully?" The gavel hadn't fallen yet, but the silence felt like it was already echoing. Two women, one truth, and a judge ready to carve the ending into stone. Judge Judy held the gavel loosely between her fingers, not lifting it, not striking it, just feeling its weight. A symbol, a reminder, an anchor for what must come next. The defendant stood trembling at the podium, eyes red and swollen, breath quivering like she was bracing for impact. The plaintiff watched her quietly, her own hand still shaking, though something in her posture had softened. Judge Judy began with a long exhale. "Here is what this court knows." The room leaned in. "You, Ms. Fowler," she said, her eyes locking onto the defendant, "lied, manipulated, forged, and intentionally humiliated a coworker who had shown you nothing but respect." Her voice did not rise, it sharpened. "And when confronted with evidence, you chose pride first, and truth last." The defendant nodded weakly, tears slipping down her cheeks. She couldn't look away this time. She couldn't hide. Judge Judy continued, "Your actions were not impulsive. They were staged, built over time, supported by arrogance and fueled by insecurity you refused to acknowledge." The plaintiff swallowed, her eyes shining, but not with anger, with validation. Judge Judy shifted her gaze to her. "And you," she said gently, "showed extraordinary restraint. You asked for fairness, not vengeance. That speaks louder about your character than anything she ever said about you." A quiet, shaky breath left the plaintiff's lips. Judge Judy then straightened in her chair, posture becoming pure authority. "For the purposes of this ruling, restitution is awarded to the plaintiff for emotional harm caused by documented harassment, workplace disruption, and the forged contract." The defendant pressed a hand to her mouth, crying quietly. "But listen to me carefully," Judge Judy added, leaning forward. "This verdict is not crafted to destroy you. It is crafted to confront you." Her voice softened, not warm, but honest. "You cannot grow if you cling to the person you pretended to be today." The defendant looked up, stunned by the unexpected depth in the judge's tone. Judge Judy continued, "You felt invisible, so you tried to make someone else disappear." A pause. "That is not strength. That is fear masquerading as power. The plaintiff looked down, tears slipping silently onto her hands. The defendant's voice broke into the space. I want to be better than this. I do. I just didn't know how to stop. Judge Judy studied her a long moment, then said, change doesn't start with knowing how. It starts with wanting to. The room fell into the deepest stillness of the entire hearing. Judge Judy raised the gavel. Judgment for the plaintiff. The sound echoed across the courtroom, sharp, clean, final. But the tone wasn't vindictive. It was clarifying. The defendant collapsed into her chair, sobbing openly. Not the dramatic kind, the kind born of finally seeing oneself without distortion. The plaintiff wiped her tears, a long breath releasing months of fear and doubt. She wasn't triumphant, she simply felt whole again. Judge Judy closed the file. Justice isn't meant to humiliate, she said softly. It's meant to reveal. She stood, gathering her notes. And arrogance, she added, always collapses under truth. The bailiff called the courtroom to rise. But for the first time since the case began, both women stood not as enemies, but as people reshaped by the truth laid bare between them.